get this started. Hello, and thank you for joining me today for learning about Universal Design for Learning, the basics. Before we get started, I have a little poll for you. I think the moderator will be able to put it up. I'm just curious, how familiar are you with UDL? Have you ever heard of it before? Are you somewhat familiar with the concept? Do you know about it and use UDL? So if you could just answer your thing in the poll, I'd be very interested just to see where we are with this. All right, looks like we have a nice mix, somewhat familiar. Some of you have never heard about it, so that's great. So after today, let me just, okay. All right, so today, the goals for the session, hopefully by the end, you'll have a better understanding about UDL and their principles. Also, I plan on sharing some ideas and technology tools to incorporate UDL into the classroom. So a little bit about myself. My name is Annjanette Bennar, and I work at Goodwin University in East Hartford, Connecticut. It is a not-for-profit higher education institute that primarily serves a diverse student population with an average age of 30 for a typical student. Goodwin is an open enrollment school and teach year-round with a trimester schedule. I have been teaching for about 15 years and began my career teaching computer applications in high school. About 9 years ago, I transitioned to higher education as an adjunct and then a full-time professor. I have recently begun teaching math in addition to teaching computer applications. I was introduced to UDL about 5 years ago when our university adopted it as a framework and provided training and communities of practice for cohorts of faculty. The intensive training took place over 8 months and included at least one half-day session a month. After I became a teaching fellow, I was asked to co-teach future cohorts of faculty in UDL training as part of the newly created Goodwin University Institute for Learning Innovations. At the end of the presentation, I will include a link if you're interested about learning more about the Institute. So to get started, UDL stands for Universal Design for Learning and is a framework to help improve teaching and learning for all students. It's based on scientific insight and research into how the brain works and how humans learn. The UDL framework was developed by the Center for Applied Special Technology, or CAST, in 1984, as technology was beginning to enter everyday life. CAST began to explore ways to improve education by using flexible methods and materials. It was groundbreaking at the time and continues to be one of the most well-researched and evidence-based practices out there. Universal Design for Learning has been growing in prominence through higher education as a way to address true learner variability. How universal design started. So the terminology was developed by Ron Mace. Ron Mace was the founder and program director of the Center for Universal Design in North Carolina. He was an architect who had a physical disability. He coined the term universal design to describe the concept of designing all products and environments to be aesthetic and usable to the greatest extent possible by everyone, regardless of their age, ability, or status in life. The design shown here on the picture represents some basic modifications for people with physical disabilities. We sometimes take these architectural features for granted because of their unintended usefulness to others. Not only can they help people in wheelchairs, it can help others such as pushing baby carriages, people who can't or don't want to walk upstairs, people who are carrying packages into buildings and don't have any free hands. It is designed to meet everybody's need. Basically, UDL is a way to address multiple learner variability by reducing barriers in education. UDL provides strategies that are front-loaded into the curriculum so students have a choice on how they learn best, how they interact with materials, and how they demonstrate their understanding of outcomes with the course. With UDL, We focus on making strategies available to students rather than designing accommodations for individual students after the planning process. This allows for greater choice and autonomy for students to learn. First, let me give you a little introduction about UDL. There are three main principles: engagement, representation, and action and expression. The goal of each principle can be found at the bottom of each column. Within each principle, there are three blocks. These are known as guidelines, which are supported by individual checkpoints, which is the bullets underneath it. These UDL principles are not a hierarchy or in any particular order, but they are laid out in the progression of a typical lesson. The checkpoints give many options and ideas. It is not a to-do list and can offer guidance as you work to make your lesson more UDLized, which is a term that we've kind of coined in our university to when we make a lesson contain more aspects of UDL. I will not be explaining each guideline in depth, but I will give a brief overview and show some examples of how it has worked in my class. The UDL in design thinking, we place learners at the heart of creating flexible learning experiences. These are some key points to consider while using the framework on the previous slide. You should use the framework to proactively design learning experiences, reduce barriers in learning, and build expert learners. I'll go into each of these in a little bit more depth. In UDL, you want to create or build expert learners. Expert learners are knowledgeable and resourceful. These learners can recognize the tools and resources that help them to remember information. They are also strategic and goal-directed. They know their own strengths and weaknesses when grasping new material. They know what they prefer and what would help them to learn best. Finally, they are purposeful and motivated. They focus on mastery and can set goals for themselves in order to accomplish the outcome. Now, this is not something that happens overnight. This is something that they learn through curriculum designed with UDL. At my university, we adopted UDL as a framework about 5 years ago. Students are beginning to recognize the changes and will even start to advocate for themselves when they encounter curriculum that has not adopted the UDL principles. They are slowly becoming expert learners, and our goal is for all students coming in to know this from the beginning and be able to be expert learners. One thing we do know about learners is that no one is the same. There is no average learner. How many of you women out there wear a size 6 shoe? Well, size 6 is the average. What if we only made shoes that fit the average person? How many other people would be left out? The same is true with learners. If you only design for the average learner in mind, we will be missing so many others. Dr. Todd Rose, Director of Mind, Brain, and Education Program at Harvard Graduate School of Education, gave a great TED Talk about the myth of the average learner if you want to check that out. He talked about how learners vary systematically in how they navigate learning experiences, where they may excel and struggle, and how they can best express what they know. One thing we can be sure of is that there will be learner variability. This is based on cognitive neuroscience and has shown us that there is not really an average learner anywhere. Each learner's brain processes information differently. To be truly effective, we need to embrace learner variability as an asset when thinking about ourselves, colleagues, families, and children. This way, we can use UDL principles to design ways for all learners to engage, understand, and respond in the most meaningful way possible. Previously, researchers believed that learners had a fixed learning style. They believed in the right, the left brain. They relied on IQ testing. Those methods were somehow static or fixed. Based on new research, the view now is that the brain is highly responsive to its environment, and our brains are not innate or fixed, but they are developed and malleable. And context has a huge impact on understanding the material. While discussing UDL, we often talk about barriers to learning. Barriers are design flaws that can be manifested in the goals, methods, and materials of assessments. As you can see in this illustration, if we gave everyone the same information, there will be some that are left out, as in the first picture. But if we provided differentiation and gave some students extra to get where they needed so they can succeed. So as you can see, we added on a few boxes. But what if we removed the barrier wall completely? There is no differentiated needed, and students would be able to succeed from the beginning. This goes along with the thought of design thinking and front-loading the curriculum. If the curriculum was built in the first place to remove as many barriers as possible, then all students could have the chance to succeed. For example, what if you had a student who is visually impaired? What would you provide for accommodations? You could provide them with a screen reader or even an audio lesson. But think about if you had a class and had others that might benefit from those same accommodations. Maybe there are students who are always driving and they would benefit from listening to the audio lesson in the car. By giving students options, you may unintentionally affect others for good. UDL planning contains a few critical elements. The first one, clear goals of assignments and assessments. You always have to think about what is the goal of this assignment, what is the goal of this assessment, and what are you actually testing or checking? And does it matter how they represent their information? You also have to have intentional planning to remove or reduce barriers while designing curriculum. You need to keep in mind some of the possible hangups for students. You also need flexible materials and methods, such as options for accessing information. And also you need to provide mastery-oriented feedback that guides learners towards mastery rather than a fixed notion of performance or compliance. All lessons should include in components of all, ultimately leading to the development of expert learners. Here again is the basic principles, which I will be going. The expert learner goal is underneath. So engagement, they are purposeful and motivated, representation, resourceful and knowledgeable, and action and expression, strategic and goal oriented. The first principle is engagement, or the why of learning. This is how learners stay engaged and remain motivated. Individuals will likely engage with information and activities that are relevant and valuable to their interests and goals. A way we can help increase engagement is to optimize choice. Individuals differ in how much and what kind of choices they prefer. Therefore, we need to support students in making and managing choices by offering the right kind of choices for levels of independence. I have begun offering choice while doing discussion boards. So instead of just writing the text-based response, I give them the option to record their response just audio, or they can make a video of themselves and post it to the discussion board. The purpose of the discussion board is to engage in the class and share information. So it shouldn't matter if it's done text or by video. I leave it up to them for what they feel comfortable doing. Here are the 3 guidelines under the engagement principle. They are defined as recruiting interest by presenting relevant learning activities with opportunities for students to make choice while reducing threats and negative distractions, sustaining effort by building in reminders, varying the level of task demand, and fostering collaboration among students. Also, self-regulation. Present students the opportunity to monitor their own knowledge and skill development. This could be done through reflective assignments, checklists, and goal-setting activities. Here is an example of an app that I use to help make my lessons more engaging. The app is Nearpod, and it helps to make the lesson interactive. In one particular lesson that I taught semester after semester, I had over 60 slides. And at the end of the class, I could tell that the students' eyes had glazed over. When I looked at my lesson through the UDL lens, I was looking to incorporate an element that included for increased participation. By giving students the flexible option to use the app increase the individual choice and autonomy while providing new tools and supports to supplement the lesson. A benefit was students could access Nearpod on a computer, tablet, or phone, which made it easily accessible for all and provided students with a level of independence. They could then interact with me and the PowerPoint in real time instead of just being a passive watcher. I also added in quizzes to check for understanding, and I found ultimately that it helped to increase engagement in the classroom. The next principle is representation, or the what of learning. The key concept of this principle is that learners differ in the way they perceive and comprehend information that is presented to them. For example, those with sensory disabilities, example blindness or deafness, or learning disabilities such as dyslexia, language or cultural differences, and so on, may require different ways of approaching content. So why do we need flexible and multiple options for accessing content? Some of us simply grasp information quicker and more efficiently through our visual or audio means rather than printed text. Also, learning and transfer of learning occurs when multiple representation are used because students are allowed to make connections within as well as between concepts. We each bring a diverse experience and background knowledge, and there is no single right way to present or make information available, so we should offer choice and let the students decide what is best for them. Here's an example of how I applied representation to one of my assignments. The assignment had multiple steps and written directions. By using guideline 3, provide options for comprehension, and more specifically, checkpoint 3.3, which is to guide information processing and visualization, I designed this flowchart, which broke down the steps of the project into smaller chunks. It allows students to explicitly see the prompts for each sequence. It helps them to break the tasks into something manageable. I would also include the written directions for those who would want to read it and not look at it visually. Here's another example of something I created for representation. For my online class, we cover Word, Excel, and PowerPoint in 2-week periods. On the left over here before is what it looks like in my Blackboard shell. That's the plain text and how it's laid out. So I created a visual so they could see what the weeks would look like and what the expectations were. I upload the graphic so they can see it both ways. And lastly, here's another example in another software that you could use to create professional infographics. This software is known as Visme. And with Visme, it's great to incorporate visuals. So UDL, it helps to include visuals. So I again took some instructions and I broke it down into an infographic so it was easily digestible. So again, it all comes to offering choice within how you offer the information, how you present the information. The last slide is action. The last guideline is action and expression. That is the how of learning. The key concept is to provide multiple ways to express comprehension and mastery of the topic. The goal of this principle is skill building of strategic and goal-directed learners. The following are the action expression guidelines. Provide alternate modalities for expression, both to level the playing field among learners and to allow the learners to appropriately or easily access knowledge, ideas, and concepts in learning environments. These guidelines include providing flexible options for physical action and how they interact with the material. This could be hands-on activities. Expression and communication. Compose and share ideas and tools that help to attain learning goals. And executive function. Develop and act on plans to make the most out of learning. An example that falls into action and expression principle is to use a website that can help teachers organize and share materials for students outside of the classroom. Padlet is a great site to use to post resources if you don't have a learning management system, such as Google Classroom, Blackboard, or Canvas. It's also a great tool to use as an activity in class. Students can work together in small groups and post their big ideas to Padlet. This could be an alternative to writing with paper and pencil and putting it on a board. It can provide a way of organizing thoughts and varying the response methods from individuals or groups. It also helps to promote student engagement in the lesson so they are an active, not a passive learner. Here's an example from Guideline 4, Provide Options for Physical Action, specifically Checkpoint 4.2, Optimize access tools to assistive technology, which is explained as open doors to learning with accessible tools and devices. In this example, I took a PowerPoint presentation that I had and just added a slide that explained different ways to access the presentation. I included instructions for changing the visual color preference, so students who may prefer a dark or a light theme can change it. I also included a translate option in case students would better understand if it was in a native language. I provided a link to a YouTube video with closed captions and provided the full transcript for those who would like to read the presentation instead of listen to it. All of these options allow students to interact with alternate accessible materials and tools by having a slide that explains the options on how to use the accessibility features in Office. Obviously, these are just a few ideas for making your class more UDLized. To have a lesson that is universally designed for learning, you do not need fancy tools. Sometimes just using pen and paper can be a modification. UDL is a framework for you to help you reduce barriers that students face in the classroom by engaging more with the material and increase ways to represent and access the material so learners can choose what is best for them and how they learn. Thank you for joining me today as I gave you a brief overview of UDL, Universal Design for Learning. I enjoyed sharing the knowledge of the basics and sharing some of my examples of UDL in action in the classroom. I have included my email address if anyone would like to reach me afterwards, and also a link to the Goodwin University Institute for Learning Innovation, where you can learn more about what we are doing at Goodwin to promote UDL in the classroom. So are there any questions?
We do have one question. We have one from Steve, who said, I see the benefit of providing multiple pathways. However, how do we encourage students to develop necessary work skills? For example, writing, if we don't somehow force them to also do things that are new or uncomfortable?
Well, again, it goes back to the goal of the assignment. If your goal is to have them write, then you don't really have to offer options. If it is to write a paper, they need to learn how to write a paper, and that is the only thing. So we're not saying that you need to change everything to add options in all particular situations, but ones that would make sense and would allow for some choice. I understand that students do need to learn these critical skills, and at some point they will be asked to do them. So by giving them options in some areas is helpful, and then you can keep the other ones as what is the goal of the assignment and keep that.
Our next question is from Michiko. Is Nearpod compatible with PowerPoint?
It is not compatible. You can upload like an outline of slides, but I found it really easy to use and to transfer my information. Plus, with using Nearpod, there was so many other options that I could use by creating quizzes. I could make an interactive field trip. I could link to websites that they could hold in their hands or on their computer screen and actually go to while I was going to it. So it did take a little bit of work, but I think in the end, the benefit was definitely worth it.
Warren asks, how do you balance the extra work of grading multiple versions of the same assignment?
Well, if it's designed properly, you can use the same rubric. So for example, for the discussion board, if I have them do a video or if I have them write text, it is still the same information that I'm looking for. I'm still looking for, how did you answer the question? Did you respond to other learners? Did you provide content? So it really doesn't matter in that regard to if it is a different modality, because if you have a rubric and you are testing the outcomes, it should be the same no matter how they represent the information.
The next question comes from Joshua. What can be done to make learners unmute their video during Zoom sessions?
Oh, that is a tricky one. That is one that we have definitely faced this past year. I'm not sure if there's a right answer for that, except to maybe set the expectation from the beginning. It's really tough because there's many different situations where they may or may not be able to show video. But I think if you start it as an expectation that this is what you want to see, then that could work. But I definitely do not have the answer for that, and I wish we could figure that one out.
And then Kelly asked, will we have access to this PowerPoint to look over after? We will be sending a recorded version of this webinar after this, and I'll let Professor Bennar answer as well.
Yes, and if you would like a copy, like I said, feel free to email me. I can send you the information. I would be happy to do that.
All righty, I'll give it one more second. If anyone else has any more questions, go ahead and type them in the chat now. And if we don't have any more questions, then I want to thank you, Professor Bennar, and thank all of you for attending today. If you or any of your fellow instructors are interested in presenting for our Learning and Growing webinar series, please submit your proposals to the Learning and Growing website, which I'm going to link to the chat in just a moment. And if you have any questions, please direct them to us at marketing@hawkslearning.com, and we will be emailing you a link to view the recording of this webinar as soon as it is available. And that should be coming in just a moment if any of you guys are interested in presenting yourself. So again, if you have any questions, direct them to us at marketing@hawkslearning.com. And I hope everyone has an amazing rest of the day. Thank you all again for attending so much, and thank you for presenting today, Professor Bennar.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. I hope you all learned a little bit more about UDL.
Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.